Welcome again to Lakeshore Focus, a weekly show highlighting the key issues, significant events, and interesting people in our region. I'm Keith Kirkpatrick. Human trafficking has become an epidemic in our world today, the equivalent of modern-day slavery. Human trafficking is an issue that reaches beyond big cities and foreign countries and into our own backyard. With us today are two FBI agents who fight every day to end human trafficking. Meet Supervisory Special Agent Bill Rowell and Supervisory Special Agent Brian Dugan. So why do you guys have Supervisory in front of your name? What's that about?
We're GS-14s, which means we're responsible for squads that investigate these matters.
Okay, so you guys have a team of people you work with then?
Correct.
Okay, like you guys are bosses?
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Oh, okay. So you work, Bill, you work out of the Merrillville office,
Correct.
right? But you're really out of Indianapolis?
Mm-hmm.
How's that work?
The Indianapolis field office is an independent field office for the FBI. There's over 50 nationwide, and it covers the entire state of Indiana. So we have what we call resident agencies throughout Indiana. Merrillville is one, and there's one in most of the other medium-sized cities throughout the state.
Okay. And Brian, you're out of Chicago, right?
Correct.
So does that mean your territory is all Chicago, or again?
Our area is the Northern District of Illinois, and so Chicago is the focus. It's the largest hub for the area, but from Chicago all the way west and all the way north to Wisconsin.
Okay. So now that we kind of got the little perspective on who you guys are doing, I kind of ask you maybe each to share a story. This human trafficking issue is kind of become a buzzword. I think most people know what human trafficking is, but do either one of you have a definition of when somebody says you work with human trafficking, what do you say?
It's modern day slavery, and it can be either labor trafficking or sex trafficking. An example would be a local man, you might call him a pimp in urban language, but for example would recruit young ladies at shopping malls or online in the area and force them into prostitution using physical violence, for example dropping dumbbells on their head or whipping them with a belt. And we would prosecute someone like that under federal human trafficking statutes.
Does that really happen around here?
It does.
I mean, like right here in Northwest Indiana, Southern Cook County, all this area.
Absolutely.
Those things happen. Mm-hmm. And so give me an example of what you're working with, Brian. Same kind of thing, or?
For Chicago, I'm the supervisor for the Crimes Against Children, which encompasses kids under 18 that are involved in human trafficking. Federally, we don't need the same elements of the crime for adult human trafficking. If it's a child, we have the ability to actually rescue that child and then begin the investigation to find out who the trafficker is and how they did their job.
Can you both give me just kind of an example? I mean, give me a profile of, one of the people you've worked with, particularly a victim, and just, obviously anonymously, but can you just kind of paint a picture of something that really did happen?
Well, when I was in Washington, D.C., I worked in Northern Virginia before I came here, and I had a Sereno that was actually in his apartment with a 14-year-old that he called his girlfriend, but then the relationship progressed to where he invited folks over to have sex with his 14-year-old, and he got the money for it. She thought she was doing it out of love for the gang member. We eventually put a case together, and he pled to 10 years federal time for doing that.
How do you find out about something like that? And I'll come to your story in a minute, but how do you get a lead on something like that? It's
people that take notice. At the time, she was talking to somebody. She was talking to someone in a counseling setting, and that person contacted us saying, I think I've got someone that one of the Serenos were prostituting. And so we got a chance to talk to her. She was very traumatized by the whole event, and we had to take our time and work with her, and then we identified other people that knew about it, interviewed them, and put together a case so that we can insulate the victim. The FBI's approach for juvenile human trafficking is a victim-centered approach, where we try to minimize the impact, the trauma on the victim, and build a case outside the victim's world so that the victim can hopefully move on, get some closure without having to be burdened with carrying a case for us.
So what'd you call them, Serenos? Is that a...
The Sereno is a gang that we had in Northern Virginia.
Okay,
yeah.
That's the name of the gang.
Correct.
Okay, I didn't know that one. So how about kind of a profile of somebody you've dealt with?
A local lady that grew up locally, a young lady, was an adult at the time, but was in a shopping mall and was approached by a human trafficker. We call them predators as well, because that's what they are. They'll almost like hunting. They'll scope out their prey and look for certain characteristics in their victim, their intended victim. They'll approach them and try and recruit or entice that person, and it'll usually start off with more of an offer for friendship or an offer to buy something for them, or they'll try to exploit some weakness. The traffickers or predators are often also psychopathic type of people, and so they might have a knack for recognizing weaknesses in people and then exploiting that. So after the initial recruitment or enticement, and after things are good, and the young lady might think that the person really likes her for who she is, and that there's some type of an interpersonal relationship and even love, the trafficker will turn on them and say, if you really love me, you'll do this, and then force them into prostitution. And if there's any hesitancy, then it can turn to the physical beatings. They can try and hook them on drugs. There can be other factors involved, threats against the person's family, cutting off all communication with the outside world, and it gives the person, it basically removes all hope for the person that they can ever get out of it, and the victim almost submits out of not seeing any other options, any way to remove themselves from the situation.
So this young woman, people would probably assume she was probably some sort of troubled person and a loner or something. I mean, who are these people that kind of get picked on? Is there any profile to that?
There can be some. Many might come from broken homes where there was not enough family structure, not enough maybe parental interest in the young person's lives, but other ones aren't. Other ones might have been raised in a normal, what you might consider normal suburban environment, went to good schools, probably went to church, and just through maybe no fault of their own at all, were targeted by a predator.
Maybe wrong place at the wrong time kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's sensationalized by some of the TV shows and so forth, but I mean, how often does the abduction kind of thing happen where they just grab some kid off the street in a van or in a mall, or really just steal them away?
I'd say that happens a lot less than maybe the movies and TV kind of glamorize. It's just like my colleague mentioned, it's a recruitment that takes time, and people take advantage of people that are vulnerable, and they just use that vulnerability to their own gain. And so it's not people just yanked off the street and brought to Chicago and let loose in some street. Usually they've gotten to know their trafficker to some extent, whether it is by love or some kind of friendship or allegiance or of some sort. It's not, if it were more people getting abducted and set loose on the street, we'd have a lot more people running to law enforcement, social services, seeking help. A lot of times we come across these victims, they're not looking for us to help them or to find them. They have their allegiance to their traffickers.
So we've talked a lot about the sex trafficking side of this, but sometimes it's just, what's some of the other, are they, do they have them stealing for them? I know they put sometimes young people into domestic servitude, right? How does that work?
Along the same line, it's following the dollar. If they can make the money by having them in the sex trade, they'll do that. If there's a place to put them in for work where they can withhold, say, immigration paperwork so that they beholden to their trafficker, and they put them to work, they can do it that way. So it's chasing down the dollar wherever they can make a buck, and if they've got that slave that they can put to work, whether it's in the sex industry or some other industry, they'll do it.
Well, this may be a gray area, but I know every once in a while you have someone come door to door, and they look like they're 15 or 16, and they're trying to sell something that you usually don't want. And when you talk to them, they won't tell you who they're with, and you see a van pick them up, and you often hear that they're being kind of held in they're kind of stuck. Is that, again, a marginal area for you guys to look at, or is that something where those kids really are trapped in those jobs?
I'd say it depends on the specific circumstances. It can be, and it can have the same indicators that a trafficking situation would have, because the kids might not have their own driver's license. They don't have their own car. They're being driven around by someone else, being controlled. All aspects of their life are being controlled by someone else. They might not have the ability to communicate with friends or family. their pay might be held back until they achieve some level of performance, and they have an extra vulnerability there than would a person who's living with their own family in their own home.
No, I know with kids it's pretty clear, because if they're under 18, that shouldn't be happening, right?
Right.
But with an adult or a young person, is it the issue of how their lack of control? I mean, besides doing something illegal, is it also a lack of control of their life?
Well, the main thing that has to be identified for us to take any kind of actions, we have to identify force, fraud, or coercion. Those are the three key elements for a federal charge. And so if it's a gray area, it's kind of hard to identify. And a lot of times, at least identifying that is talking to the victim, whether they're under 18 or over 18, it's still, we have to identify those three elements.
How big is this problem? I mean, can you get some dimension to this at all in our region, nationwide, worldwide?
Estimates are for Indiana that the number of people who are victims, who are probably being trafficked as of right now in the state of Indiana, is in the hundreds. Nationwide, thousands, possibly tens of thousands. Worldwide, the estimates are 15 to 20 million at any given time. And then people that are being trafficked on an annual basis, either being forced into it or moved around. Indiana estimates are dozens, nationwide tens of thousands maybe, and worldwide maybe on the order of millions per year. It's hard to tell exactly, because a lot of times for the labor trafficking, it can be made to look just like any other migrant worker or transient worker. They might even actually have worker visas coming into the U.S., for example. With the sex trafficking, it's really under the radar until we or other law enforcement find out about it, so it's hard to get real close numbers.
I can see why the statistics would be really tough. It's not like you can line up a whole bunch of people and say, would you please raise your hand if you're stuck in some sort of sex trafficking, right? You're not, It's just, so that number is very lucid. But you talked about the Indiana numbers. I mean, I'm assuming the Chicago numbers and northern Illinois even are like,
well,
quite a
we
bit
talked
bigger.
to NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's an independent agency that tracks missing and exploited kids. And when I spoke to them a few months ago, they said for 2013, we had about 413 NCMEC tips that came to Chicago for kids that were at risk. And that means they could be trafficked, it could be not, but it's something that we would take action to try to identify, find the child, and at least rescue them from any kind of situation they may be in.
And that's just the one you're getting tips on.
Right.
How big is this problem of people grabbing kids or young people in other countries and bringing them here? Is that a huge portion of it or a small portion?
I wouldn't say it's a big portion of people being brought here. When I was in San Francisco, we had situations where there weren't kids, adults being brought here from Asia, but a lot of times their families sold them into it, and when they were here, they had a lifestyle that was better than where they were. We had a large case that went up, and unfortunately a lot of the charges got dropped because the victims in the end agreed with what they were doing was maybe not the best lifestyle, but they didn't see it as something that they wanted to testify against their traffickers. We do see it more in other countries where U.S. citizens travel. The Chicago field office has the Child Sex Tourism Initiative that's based out of Manila in the Philippines. The Philippines is the number 2 destination for U.S. citizens to travel for overseas child sex.
So what kind of, I guess I probably can imagine the profile of somebody who tries to get involved in the sex side, but what's the profile of the person who says, yeah, I'll take this kid in and they're just going to be kind of our house slave, or they're going to be the nanny for our kids, and they kind of buy them or whatever. I mean, what's the profile of the family who does that?
Typically, they're not people that are from the United States. They've immigrated here from another country where it's culturally acceptable there to have house servants that are treated, in effect, like a slave. So.
Wow. So, is a lot of people like that, or just there's pretty isolated incidents, or again, it's hard to know, I guess, right? I'm asking you guys to describe something that's almost difficult to put your hands around, right?
Yes, you'll hear about it when it comes out, and I'd say the longer that the victim house servant stays in the United States, the more likely they are to realize something's not right here. I'm not being treated the way I see other people in society being treated, and someone else out in society might become aware of that person, somebody will typically call the local police and say there's something wrong going on here, and then questions start getting asked and the victim can be rescued.
So what's your professional opinion about this? I know it's been probably a while now, that incident, I think it was in Ohio, where the two women were kept trapped in this house for a long time and nobody really knew it for like 5 years. I mean, I think everybody was like, how does that happen? That somebody is held for that long a period of time with no one noticing it?
Well, I mean, I think you could think back to the case in New York City where the woman was beaten and everybody else thought someone else was going to call about it. I mean, it's just things that people observe. You know, there's red flags out there. NCMEC sends out, and you can always check NCMEC's website to see what red flags are out there for people who are being trafficked, whether it is for the sex industry or labor. But people see them and sometimes just don't, think anything of it, or they don't think that they're the ones that need to report it. Someone else will.
Well, how do you guys deal with this all the time? It must be very personally upsetting to see some of this stuff. I mean, how do you kind of cope with this as a profession?
Well, with the juveniles, it's heart-wrenching. And it's tough work. It takes a person with a certain type of personality to deal with it, to compartmentalize, to realize that they're doing something good, even though sometimes the end doesn't turn out to be a person arrested or sent away, because the child's best interest is to get them out of the situation, and sometimes that's a victory in itself. And so sometimes we have to take those small victories.
How do you cope with this, Bill?
It helps to look at victims that have come out of it successfully through a result of our efforts or someone else's efforts, and recognize that they're living a good life now, a decent life, and to hear their stories and recognizing where they came from. And it's inspiring to hear their strength and fortitude in that, in continuing on, and just to realize that there's more out there that are like that, and the more we can help, the better.
What do you do when you lose one? I remember years ago when I was working, and we were talking before, I was working in the court system, and I remember this one girl, we worked with her, couldn't help her. She finally just eventually got locked up, and she was begging to get back out. I thought she finally realized it at the last moment, but it was too late. I mean, what do you do when you lose? How do you deal with that?
Well, a good example is an agent that works for me rescued a girl that was being trafficked from Iowa all the way to Chicago. And she got her a place. Part of the FBI's missions, we also have victims service personnel that they're not agents, their whole job is to take care of victims. We relocated this child back in LA, and within a week she ran away from the shelter in LA and started getting involved in trafficking again. Was she willing? Was she being trafficked or forced? It's tough, and for that agent to deal with that after developing rapport and developing a relationship with that person and thinking that we did the right thing, it was heart-wrenching. But they pick things up and they find the victim again, and we try to move her again. And she was sorry for running away, but it's a lifestyle that we're intersecting a lifestyle that they've already started developing for a couple of years. And like your example, they don't see it right away. I mean, it takes a little while for the reality to set in, and all we can do is be patient and kind of live our lives and do it best as we can.
It can be there. How about for you? Just when you lose one, what's it feel like?
I like to know that there's always going to be second chances, third chances, fourth chances, and we've got programs both in the government and with non-governmental organizations that will always step up, and when the person's ready, that they'll reach out and help them and try and bring them to a place where they can make it on their own and not have to be involved in that lifestyle anymore.
What message can we give to the viewers, to the audience, about what part they play or can play in helping reduce this problem, try to eliminate it? What do they need to be doing? The average citizen, is there anything they can do?
Well, be aware. Go to NCMEC's site, look up the red flags so you kind of see what's going on. Your average runaway, we might just disregard, but there are children at risk. The awareness, I think, in the last 20 years is really what's picked up. I don't know if human trafficking's picked up, but I think people have become more and more aware of, they're not just some street vagrant, they're not some person just trying to turn tricks. We realize that they are people that are at risk, they're people that are being trafficked, that they're victims and are not even a 16-year-old, they're not choosing to do this so much. There's a reason why they're doing it, and so we need to take proactive measures to try to help them out.
What would you say to the general public, and what's one of those red flags maybe? Got about a minute.
Being aware, I'd say that as well, and there's a national human trafficking hotline that people can call, run by the Polaris Center. They can Google that. Otherwise, is to just keep their eyes open and use common sense. And if they see a situation that doesn't look right, too many young ladies living in one place, too many of anybody living in one place where their rights might seem to not be, might not seem to be enjoying their rights the way typical people would in this area. Bruises, scars, manipulation of a person. Just keep their eyes open.
So the moral of the story is it's always better to report than to, if you don't hesitate, just go ahead and bring it up. Thank you both for being here and sharing this. I hope it really helped our viewers, and thank you for all you're doing to help the kids and the young people. Appreciate it. Right. I'm not sure if we Americans live in an insulated or isolated world. Most of us are sheltered from constant threats of bodily harm and psychological terrors. We live with a tremendous amount of freedom and a general absence of fear. Are we insulated or isolated from the extreme dangers that many individuals here or groups in other parts of the world experience? We insulate our homes to keep the warmth or coolness in or out depending on the season. We create a barrier from the elements which might potentially harm us or make us uncomfortable. Similar to household insulation, most of us insulate our lives from those who might harm us or create discomfort. Isolation is a further step that completely separates us from any person who may, in the slightest way, make our life difficult. Self-imposed isolation also places us in a position where we totally ignore the pain and suffering of others. There's a scene in the movie Hoosiers, a favorite of Indiana residents, where Gene Hackman, playing a basketball coach, is confronted by his predecessor, who has just been relieved of his duties. The vanquished coach threatens Hackman when he says, "There are two kinds of crazy, one where a man runs around naked and howls at the moon. The other is when he does it in your house. The first one you can ignore, the second one you have to deal with." There are problems in our world today that are as scary and foreign to us as the unclothed raving man. I wonder if most of us are just ignoring that guy. We don't want to see or know about him. We keep our doors closed and locked so he won't come in. We will not go to places where he might be. First, we insulate and then we isolate. Those who suffer and are in harm's way continually live lives of desperation and threat. They do not have the luxury to place a barrier between or barricade themselves from the world. Meanwhile, bad things continue to happen to people. Edmund Burke said, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing." We all need to be more aware of the immense problems some people face and determine how we can help make a difference. Thanks for watching Lakeshore Focus. What are your thoughts? Did we challenge you or make you think in a different way? Please send your comments to our email address, which is on the screen, or reach us through our website, also listed. You can visit the website and watch previous episodes of Lakeshore Focus. Tell your friends and family to check out great past shows. You can send us your comments on them too. Join us next week for another Lakeshore Focus. I'm Keith Kirkpatrick saying, make a positive difference in our world today.